Hey, so I don't have a microphone like I had the last time that I did one of these ASMR lives, and I just realized I forgot to put ASMR in it, so it's fine, it doesn't matter. I don't know what the sound quality is like, so I'm gonna say that off the cuff. So hopefully, it's not bad. I turned everything off in my background, but if anybody comes, you guys can tell me. So, we're gonna be talking about Ghost in the Shell, the manga. I got this when it came out in 1998, so that's literally almost like 30 years ago, right? And I used to like read it all the time at lunch. Like I would take it to school with me. I was a junior in high school back in 1998, so I'd read it on the bus. I'd read it at lunchtime in the cafeteria. I'd read it. I'd reread it, like all that good stuff. One of the things that stood out the most was how philosophical it was. Masamune Shirow is very similar to me to Katsuhiro Otomo, who directed Akira, which was also based off of a manga, right? So they're kind of similar where it's like they're based off these manga, and then there was an anime that both of the manga artists directed the anime, and then the anime became classics as well. But both were very philosophical, right? And they both dealt with the future. They were both dystopian, had a lot of different ideas about like techno-futurism, right? And some of the darker places that society may go. And they were really prescient with some of the themes that they discussed in their respective manga and anime, right? So again, Ghost in the Shell and Akira, right? But with Ghost in the Shell, if any of you have ever gotten the manga, as I said, there are author's notes at the end. So I just actually wanted to read them. I remember back when I read this for the first time in high school, I was like blown away by the author's notes. So what Masamune Shirow did is he put a page number for every single note. So you would know the exact like scene and like panel that he was referencing, and you could then of course go back and you could look at it yourself. So I was just going to go through and like read through it and go from there. So sorry, I just got distracted. That's okay. All right, hacker. So remember, this is real quick. This is 1998. I want to make sure of that. That's when I got it. I believe that's when it was published in Japan. Maybe it was 97, okay? But that's how far back this was. So keep that in mind when I'm reading these terms to you. So like, if you're younger, maybe, right? I'm 43. Anybody that's in this live or anybody that watches some of it later, if you're younger, maybe if you weren't even born back in 1998, or if you were like very young, to kind of put it in perspective, right? There were no cell phones back then. AOL 2.0, like 3.0 was basically what people were using to connect to the internet. So it was dial-up internet. There was no 5G to speak of course, right? There was no high-speed internet, anything, right? Dial-up internet, like it sounds like, there wasn't any wireless modem connectivity. Like it used your telephone to connect to the internet. So you could not be connected to the internet and also be on the phone. There were house phones back then, right? So that's how far back in time, hi Sandy, that's how far back in time Ghost in the Shell was when it was published. So when I read some of the author's notes, just keep that in mind, right? Like some of the things that maybe seem obvious now, it's like we were so far back when this was published in 1998 that, all that was available was dial-up internet, right? There were no cell phones. There was no, like I just said, there was no, wireless internet and all that stuff. So hacker, page 17, a computer criminal who infiltrates other cyber brains, steals information, manipulates data and programs, plants viruses, and otherwise corrupts them. The penalty for genius hackers who can infiltrate ghosts, souls, or psyches is particularly harsh. So, you might say to yourself now in 2025, who doesn't know what a hacker is? Why would Masamune Shirow have to explain that term? That's why, though. Because back in 1998, when this was published, a lot of people didn't know what the hell a hacker was, right? Or weren't familiar with the term, right? It was not something that was universally known, right? So if you were really, really, really into that stuff, then sure, right? It's no different than today, right? The people that, you know, are early adopters tend to get on board. So like maybe, you know, if you're talking about like augmented reality or something, but back then there were plenty of people who'd be like, what's a hacker? You know what I mean? So in his particular manga, though, you know, as I just said, genius hackers, the difference was, right, a typical hacker was hacking something just like a password, right? So obviously like you would do today. A genius hacker, though, in Ghost in the Shell, was actually infiltrating ghosts, right? So Ghost in the Shell, right? Or Ghost in the Machine as it was titled in Japan, right? So the soul or the psyche, right? So particularly the brain, right? And that's really what, you know, the manga was about. It was about a lot of different things. If you haven't read the manga, maybe you saw the anime. There have been different versions. At one point, Standalone Complex was actually on Cartoon Network. So it's like, right, there have been a lot of different, you know, adaptations over the years, right? It's been almost 30 years since Masamune Shirow, obviously, you know, released this manga. But the point is, a lot of what he was talking about is very similar to like Serial Experiments Lain, right? Like, is there a way, like if we get really macro, to download your consciousness, right? So like, I'm not just talking now about Ghost in the Shell. Like I said, I'm talking about like Serial Experiments Lain, like, which came out around the same time, right? Like a lot of these anime and these manga were exploring these themes back in the mid to late 90s, right? Like I said, before the internet had even gotten to like, we're not even to like YouTube, right? YouTube was not created until 2005, right? So 96, 98, people are still using like AOL for their mail, and you know, Yahoo was like the search engine people were using back then. It wasn't Google, right? You have dial-up internet, like I was saying when I first started the live, right? You don't have like wireless, you know, connectivity. You don't have a modem, right? And all that stuff, you know. So they were, you know, projecting to the future though. And they were saying, okay, is there going to be a time though, like we go a couple of decades into the future where you can actually like separate somebody's consciousness, right? Their consciousness from their physical self, right? Their physical being. And then can you download their essence, right? Into some kind of collective internet, right? And that's something that's actually being looked into right now. So I'm not saying it's possible, but it is being looked into, right? I don't know if it was, I don't remember who it was. Like, I don't know if it was Bezos. Like, it was definitely a CEO who had founded a tech company who's looking into that, right? Like, literally trying to see if there's a way that once he dies, could he preserve his consciousness? And then if there is a time in the future where they could somehow revive his body, could he then, you know, download the consciousness into the body? It's like, this is what he was talking about, right? This is what Serial Experiments Lain was talking about. So Serial Experiments Lain is obviously a different anime. I don't know what you can talk about on TikTok. I don't want to get flagged, but a classmate does something to herself where she is no longer around anymore, and then another classmate discovers that her consciousness is actually existing on the internet. So although the classmate is no longer alive, her consciousness is, and then it goes from there, right? But it's the same kind of question. Okay, so that was the first author's note. So there's like a couple of pages of these. The next one is page 20. When you copy a page of something, the original does not disappear. And in the same way, information isn't really lost when it's stolen in this story. The only way you can really know it's stolen is by detecting when an improper contact is taking place. And it's hard to tell if it's really improper or not, or when there is some indication that others have the information. This requires an assumption. Since those who stole it will, obviously, pretend they didn't and will manipulate the data, information wars become extraordinarily difficult. There can be multiple rulers existing simultaneously in the cyber brain world, and their power is determined by the number of keys they have to access each network and by their ability to break through defensive barriers. The problem is the great numbers of code keys or barrier breaking ability and the information processing power, not the size of the database. There's no use having a huge amount of information. If it's always being controlled, the network can still be cut off whenever desired. Ideally, one exerts the necessary controls at the necessary times in a way that it won't be discovered, in order to be able to respond to changes in information rather than concentrating it at one location. It's also better to decentralize and redistribute it. That also means if there's an accident or a disaster, damage will be kept to a minimum. In other words, the nervous system of a cyberbrain person is his or her own individual network. That's what I was just talking about, right? So today somebody goes, okay, well, whatever, right? Like we have 5G, like whatever the fuck, right? It's like, oh, it's an internet network. No, when this was published almost 30 years ago in 1998, like I said, that didn't exist. So what Masamune Shirow was like doing was he was, like I said, like projecting into the future, and he was thinking about like the brain, like the human brain, and like all of the neural networks and the interconnectivity that you see within neural pathways in the brain. Will we get to the point where we see something similar with like internet networks, right? And will they, maybe be able to like self-replicate themselves, let's say? Of course, what does that make you think about in 2025? Probably AI, right? He was very prescient, right? Like I keep talking about Katsuhiro Otomo, who was the mangaka who wrote Akira, right? I keep talking about Serial Experiments, Lain. Like these directors, these mangaka were prescient because a lot of the questions that they were asking, not the theories, but like I would say the philosophical concepts that they were delving into back in the mid to late 90s, right? When none of this technology existed yet, right? Absolutely none of it has either come to pass or really like we are on the like forefront of it happening, or it's being looked into like as I do this live right now, right? So obviously if you've seen any of the iterations, like I said, of Ghost in the Shell, if you've watched the anime, the Standalone Complex, there was a movie, I mean, like seriously, there was a TV series, blah blah, right? Cartoon Network, blah blah blah. If you've seen any of it, a lot of what Masamune Shirow was asking questions about and predicting has either come to pass, or it's things that like might be happening in the very near future. Like I just said, with AI, with robotics, cyberkinetics, like all that stuff. So, okay, the next note is page 27. Regarding the antenna function of the brain, one thing people, or what might better be called spirits, were originally capable of was a type of channeling that allowed them to synchronize with the external universe and make contact with the internal universe and with Kiko energy, things easily understood as phenomena. For cyborgs whose bodies are almost completely machines, in a sleep state, so when they run a scientific cyber brain sync, they can easily enter a quasi-channeling state. So, parentheses. This is Masamune Shirow saying this because it's his author's notes. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks this way, but when people talk about the mentally disturbed or schizophrenic person hearing broadcasts or voices, it might be related to this phenomenon. So found this really interesting, right? Because he's, was making a point about like, so again, these are all notated with like a page number, so you can flip back to the page in the manga, see what he's talking about, look at the panel and understand the note. But he's making a point of like, okay, a schizophrenic person, let's say, right? Somebody maybe who has multiple personality disorder, when they say that they hear voices in their head, what are those voices, right? What's the noise? What's the static? Or, where is that coming from? What's the source of it? And, in his mind, he thought the basis of this phenomena was like that person, right, was potentially like a channel for something, right? And perhaps like it was neurologically channeling like through that person's brain. And then that's how the individual was like processing that as, voices internally, right? But, to take that one step further, it within his manga. So that's a human being, obviously, right? We're talking about somebody that would be diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was saying, though, in his manga, for cyborgs, who are almost like, let's say 95% robots, like machines, right? For them, their sensory mechanisms, they have different sensory states that they go in and they go out of, but they also can get into a state where they can channel things. So I just thought that comparison was very interesting, right? Because, they're talking today about, somebody, if they lose an arm, let's say, maybe that they would be given like a literal cyberkinetic arm. Like it's getting to the place of like video games, right? Or like if you guys saw like Star Wars, like the prequels when like Anakin, like his hand and all that, right? they're talking about that happening for real, in real life though, right? And that it would operate maybe even better than like a human arm. And it's like, okay, so that's just an arm, right? So maybe somebody says, like, who cares, right? Like, that's not something having to do with the person's brain. But it still opens up the question of what is that interaction though, right? Like once you are getting to a place, because actually the fact is like my brain is what is telling me to like read right now, right? It's sending signals that's telling my mouth to like open and to like read these words, right? So what happens when you have that overlap, right, between a part that is cyberkinetic, right? It's not like plastic or alloy or whatever they're making right now, and there's that interplay between the human brain and like the cyberkinetic part. What if it's 90%, right? If you ask that question, like what if it's somebody who gets into like a really bad accident or something? So now it's not just one body part or one limb. What if it's 90% of their body? So now most of their body is cyberkinetic. So I thought that was a very interesting theme as well. Okay, this is the next author's notes. So this is what I'm going through. Ghost in the Shell, because I see a few more people have joined, so this is what I'm talking about. But page 36, most types of artificial blood being considered are white in color. Androids in recent science fiction have white blood. Again, this is 1998 when this came out. In my story, however, in view of the antenna effect and magnetism influence, I've given my android red blood with an iron component. The liquid that the neurochips are soaking in, by the way, is neither red blood nor white blood, but a neatly transparent artificial spinal fluid. Blood products apparently never flow directly into the human brain due to the blood-brain barrier. And I've heard this is a special mechanism to ensure that foreign substances in the blood never directly attack the brain. So I just thought that was interesting because it shows how much research Masamune Shirow really put into Ghost in the Shell. Like he's researching things like blood-brain barrier. That comes up a lot if you look into like, I would say like psychoactive like compounds or different drugs and how they interact in terms of like whether it gives people like a recreational high or it has like opiate qualities, and the fact that he like researched it enough down to like the color of the blood, right, for the cyborgs in the manga, I thought was really interesting and just showed like how philosophical his approach was to Ghost in the Shell. Okay, so the next note is page 37 regarding Bateau. So Bateau, if you have not read the manga or seen the anime, is sorry, I've had a really long day. Kusanagi's partner. So they're both cops. Okay. So regarding Bateau's line on page 36, personally, this is his note. I think all things in nature have ghosts. So ghost in the shell, ghost in the shell, right? This is a form of pantheism and similar to ideas found in Shinto. So Shintoism is like one of the number one religions in Japan, along with like Buddhism and stuff like that. And similar to ideas found in Shinto or among believers in the Manitou, because of the complexity and function and the physical constraints they have when they appear as a physical phenomenon. It may be impossible to scientifically prove this. There are, after all, humans who act more like robots than robots. And one cannot say for certain that they have no ghosts just because they don't act like it. In ancient times, neither air nor the universe were believed to even exist. Just for reference, I should state that not all ghosts are the same in terms of complexity or effect. So I thought that was pretty interesting. That actually made me think, I don't want to get up because I'm streaming and I don't want people to think I'm leaving, but I have a movie called Ex Machina that I really love. I think it came out back in like 2015, but asked a similar question, right? Like, you know, the Turing effect, basically, like, okay, at what point would a robot or an android be able to convince a human being that they are human, even if they are in fact a robot or an android? So, that's what that movie was about. And he's making the point, again, like, how do you prove a negative, basically, right? Sorry, that startled me. Just heard something in my apartment. Sorry if you guys heard that too. I'm going to keep going. But, he was saying, you don't know if there's a ghost, if there isn't a ghost. You can't prove it. You can't prove they don't exist. So hopefully a lot of you guys, if you came in here, you're familiar with Ghost in the Shell, so I don't have to kind of explain every concept. What he's talking about with Shinto, there's like multiple gods in that religion. So it's similar to like Buddhism or like Hinduism. So I just thought that was interesting, kind of like it made me think of Ex Machina, right? I read also like a kind of a thought exercise. I'm trying to remember it like word for word. I don't want to misquote it. But it was basically along the lines of like if there was a robot that said that they were 1,000% fluent in Japanese, but that they weren't actually fluent at all. And the reality is that they just had a system where, like, for every character, they had memorized a way to just spit out, like, what the actual character represented, but they didn't have any understanding of what it was. Would there be a way for you to be able to tell they're not fluent, the robot? And it gets really deep. Like, you can try to Google what I'm talking about to try to find it, but it's a pretty long thought exercise. And it's like, actually, the answer is no, right? It really wouldn't be possible because at the end of the day, you can't read someone's mind, even if it's a robot. But it's like the robot had no understanding and it was just spitting out, right? Like every time it was given like Japanese, like kanji, right? Like Japanese characters to read, it was spitting back like what the translation was, but didn't have any actual understanding. So just made me think about a couple of different things. So I thought that was an interesting note. Okay, so the next author's note, page 48. Hold on, I want to see what a flash goal is. Okay, I don't stream a lot on here, so. Okay, page 48. Japan currently has, this is 1998 when this was written, no Ministry of Internal Affairs. The police in Japan are headed by a state minister and a 5-member National Public Safety Commission, including the Prime Minister. In Ghost in the Shell, politics aren't the main theme. So to make things less confusing, and because I like the way the British do things, I've created a foreign ministry and a Ministry of Internal Affairs. England has shadow cabinets, a term that has awfully negative underworld connotations in Japanese, so I don't like it. But I hope our opposition parties in Japan operate like that someday. So that's more like political, not really philosophical. So I'm going to skip over that note. That's not really what I'm focusing on. Okay, next note, page 50. Government departments in Japan generally start drawing up their rough budget requests for the next year in April. It's another way of saying, give me money. The end of August is the Ministry of Finance's deadline. At the end of the year, the Ministry of Finance then presents a revised budget to the cabinet and shows it to each ministry and agency. This is, in other words, the ministry's request to hold the line at point X, quote unquote. Upon accepting this, the head honchos, on up to the vice ministers at each ministry and agency, start negotiating to try to restore whatever amount they can, with howls of protest and requests for a chance to explain further. Then the Minister of Finance presents the final draft to the cabinet, and the cabinet presents it to the Diet, or, one hopes, Parliament. In the story, however, the budget for Motoko's, so Motoko Kusanagi, the main character, if you know nothing about Ghost in the Shell, Motoko's unit is part of a secret black fund. So again, this is more kind of like the backstage politics and like funding and police stuff. So that's not really what this live is about. So I'm gonna skip discussing that as well. Next note, page 56. I wasn't saying hi. Sorry. I don't like stream on here a lot. Hi everyone, sorry I wasn't like tapping the thing that's supposed to say hi. Page 56, for safety reasons and to prevent information leaks, all of them, including Major Kusanagi, live in more than one place. Downtown apartments, suburban condos, company housing, hotel rooms, etc. During their cyber brain contact, they've turned off their connection to the outside network in order to thwart hackers from jamming the system. If someone has their cyber brain key, however, they can still establish direct contact. This is so interesting to me, because this is exactly what Elon Musk is doing right now. If you all remember when he was talking about assisting individuals that are paralyzed with Neuralink, right? So like a neural implant that would allow them to interact on social media. People that don't have the use of like their arms or their fingers or their hands and things like that. But it was very dangerous, the way that Elon Musk had the implant surgically implanted, right? He did it in such a way that he actually like opened the person's like brain because he wanted it done very quickly. So there was a safer way of doing it, but Elon Musk pushed a very aggressive timeline. And it's like, to me, it's just incredible that, again, this was written almost 30 years ago, published almost 30 years ago at this point in 1998 when I initially read it in high school. He was predicting these things, Masamune Shirow, right? Because when you're talking about you know, obviously like a cyber brain key and all that. So I get if somebody goes, okay, but a neural implant is not the same as somebody hacking someone's brain, but it's like, no, it's going there, because if you can, you know, implant something, you know, that allows, again, like a, let's say like a paralyzed person or like a disabled person to access their social media profiles and get notifications, what is to stop somebody from hacking that neural implant and then, let's say, deleting that person's profile through the implant? It's like, it's actually more unbelievable that the implant even exists versus somebody being able to hack the implant. So while it's not a cyber brain key, the ideas behind what Masamune Shirow was talking about, the types of dystopian technology use that he was predicting in Ghost in the Shell, a lot of it has come to pass. So I found that very fascinating. All right, so the next one is page 58. Hold on. Sorry, I kind of like lost where I was. I'm gonna skip around a little bit because some of these are more about the like political aspects of, because Kusanagi is a police officer, so some of his notes are more about like the political aspects of like police in Japan. That's not what this is about. It's more about what I said, like the philosophical aspects and his prescient predictions of like technofuturism and how dystopian some of the technology used for it could become in the coming decades. So let me see what note I want to read next. Okay, these are kind of technical notes about like the revolvers that are used in the story and stuff like that. Like, obviously she's a cop, so you can see, you know, there's obviously like weaponry that she uses and stuff. Oh, AI, here we go, page 64. AI stands for artificial intelligence. Yes, back in 1998, when this was published, and I read it, I was a junior in high school, I was 16. A lot of people had not known what the fuck that was. Everybody was on dial-up internet. There wasn't even cell phones back then, right? So think about that, right? If you're on this live and you're younger than I am, because I'm 43, right? If I say AI today, everybody knows what it is. Like, how many commercials were there during the Super Bowl for it? How much do you see it online? How much do you see ads for it? But back in 1998, it's like, what's AI, right? That was not an acronym at all. That was used commonly. So AI stands for artificial intelligence. This is a field of research in computer science that studies not just business-related information processing, but intelligence functions. I think of it, so this is Masamune Shirow saying this, because it's his author notes for Ghost in the Shell. I think of it as a knowledge information processing device that is not human, that is artificial. Experts hold a variety of opinions on this. Damn, how prescient was he? Look at everything they're talking about now with AI and how far it's going. It's really going to the point of, I wish I could go up and get it, but I think people would leave. But I have an anime called Kashan Robot Hunter. So I'm talking about the OVA, right? Sorry, not the OVA. I'm talking about the movie that was on Sci-Fi Channel back in the mid-90s, right? So not the TV show, that's not that, all the stuff that came later, right? But basically, I think that could happen in real life, that you could tell an AI program, right? And it's a famous thought exercise, but this is what Kashan Robot Hunter, but this is going back to like late 80s, right? I think when that came out, right? So basically, the Black King, this robot, was told in Kashan Robot Hunter to do everything that he could to save the environment and to save the planet and to reverse the ecological destruction and harm that had occurred, you know, obviously over thousands of years. And he took it literally and did everything he could to get rid of humanity, because who else has caused the destruction to the environment more so than humans have? And that's what, you know, Kashan Robot Hunter is basically about. So the main character, Kashan, his father, I haven't seen it in a while, but in high school I watched it like 100 times. It was like one of my favorite anime, had created the Black King, and then the Black King killed him and killed his wife. So Kashan's parents were killed by the Black King. So then Kashan tries to get revenge, but the Earth is ravaged by all these robots that end up being created by the Black King, and he's following the directive in his robot mind that Kashan's father gave him, because again, he was the scientist that created him. And that's very real. That's something that absolutely can happen. There are all these different thought exercises that talk about the fact that AI is so literal that it could end up like literally destroying humanity, thinking that it's following orders. So just think it's interesting just to see that note from Masamune Shirow, because absolutely, right? It's knowledge, it's information, it's black and white. It's inhumane, right? Because it's just going to apply what it's being told to do and not think of the consequences, the fallout. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it ethical? Is it morally permissible? It's just, I have been instructed and programmed to do this. I'm going to do it. So, let's see. What's next? Oh, I folded the page for this. That means I thought something was really interesting. So let's say, ooh, and I wrote a note. Do you guys see this? Where? Can you see that? Brain death. So let's read. Page 68. Contagious medical waste or biohazardous garbage is often poorly handled and will become a major problem in the future. Not only are the associated costs astronomical, but terrorists may start using some of the disease-carrying material. Interesting. Finding a solution, create a huge high-temperature incinerator and collection specialists. The Parks and Recreation can come later. Should be given top priority by local governments and hospitals. Are they really sealing this stuff properly and giving it to the right parties? From what I hear, the volume isn't that great. In this illustration, our senior citizen isn't being pecked by crows, probably because he's pickled in some sort of hazardous substance. So I just thought that was interesting because, you don't have to look very far to kind of go back to like 2020 and just, there have been various like viruses and diseases. And when you look at things, even like mad cow's disease, like to Masamune Shirow's point, it's like there isn't really, to me, a great effort sometimes made to like contain things before they get out of hand, or before they get to the point where it's like a pandemic or an epidemic, right? So whether it's avian flu, mad cows, like there's been so many different examples of this that I've seen, because I'm 43, and they could do a better job. So then, one could ask themselves, why don't they, right? And if it's because they don't want to, it's like, well, why don't they want to? So thought that was interesting. Let me see what's next. Okay, so this is more just about police stuff. Like I said, she's a cop, she has a partner, so some of his notes are just about Kusanagi and her partner Bateau. So let me look at this next note. Okay, this one's interesting, page 98. A robot is a system. This includes computers. We're in a specific, remember, this is 1998. So some of these things that seem so obvious today in 2025, it's like, oh yeah, AI is artificial intelligence, was not obvious at all when this was written and published back in the late 90s. A robot is a system. This includes computers, wherein a specific input or instruction results in a specific output or performance. Some robots by themselves can discriminate and perform multiple tasks to a certain extent. So I underlined the next sentence. But robots are fundamentally different than androids. Android, so he put that in quotation marks, is a word that refers to the mecha that results when humans try to see if they can create humans using mechatronics. Conversely, it's a type of mecha that allows humans to mouth statements like, humans are complex, but they are a system, so they can be replicated if only these components are put together in such and such a way. I find this so fascinating. When I read it when I was 16 in 1998 when it came out, I didn't really think that much of it, to be honest with you. Like I had seen like Terminator 2 and stuff like that at the time. But to see how far things have gone, like if you guys like go back and you look at CES, it's like a really big tech conference that happened this January in Las Vegas. If you look at some of like the technology they have now with like robots and like some of the stuff Elon Musk is talking about, like live in Android maids, that can clean your house, they can cook for you, they can do your laundry, they can do your personal tasks, they can be your personal assistant. Literally, his ad for it, I saw on LinkedIn, was so creepy, was that it'll take care of your kids and free up your time so you can actually do the things you want to do. And just it was off-putting, just the way he put it, because it's like, do you actually want to live with an android? Because I don't want to live with an android, right? It wasn't like hire the android and then it goes back. It was a live-in, right? And this is what he's talking about, right? It's not the same as a robot. And it's like, it's that hubris of humanity, right? Of like, if we have the intellect to develop something, we just push forward and we do it. And we don't think about whether we should. It's like Jurassic Park, where Jeff Goldblum said, Jurassic Park, right? It's like, you don't stop to think if you should do it. You just go on ahead and do it. Like, I'm paraphrasing him from the first Jurassic Park movie. There is a company, if you guys look it up, they are actually doing what was done in Jurassic Park with woolly mammoths. So you can Google this literally on your, like, whatever the fuck right now. They are taking DNA, and they're going to clone a woolly mammoth. And it's like, that is the plot of Jurassic Park. If you guys haven't seen the first one, they took DNA of a dinosaur from a mosquito that had been trapped, frozen in ember, or whatever it was, right, for like thousands of years and all that. But, it's like, of course, you design something that is so technologically advanced, that is stronger than a human, it's quicker, it's faster, and all this stuff. Of course, it can turn on us. So I found that to be a very, today reading it, not, I've reread it over the years. Not so much when I read it when I was 16. I didn't really think that much of it. But as technology just kept progressing and progressing, and like it never stopped to like ask itself any questions. And it just started to get to a place of like, okay, this is like going too far. Really just going back and looking at these notes has been very, very interesting. Okay, so the next quote, author's note, page 97. AIs with prosthetic bodies probably never experience hunger, sexual desire, the desire to sleep, or even the desire for glory and honor, unless programmed to do so. So I underlined that part. If they have any desire, it's probably to expand their network or create something or control something. In other words, to grow as an information system. This is something we may know in the near future. Again, this was published in 1998. But have no way of determining now. I don't think there's an AI superior to a human in existence yet, but how should I know? I'm only a cartoonist. So this is Masamune Shirow, manga cover Ghost in the Shell. The definition of a human is very vague. So when an AI superior to a human is developed, the question is, will humans be able to recognize it? And that's what I was just talking about with Ex Machina. I don't think so, because once they have surpassed us, that's how she kills her creator. If you think back to Ex Machina, once they surpass us, they're going to know how to outsmart us, how to trick us, and deceive us into believing that they have not surpassed us and that we are still more intellectually advanced than they are, right? That's the whole point. If I'm smarter than you, I can trick you. So I found that interesting. And, we haven't reached that sort of cliff yet, but we're getting closer to it. Really look up CES. If you didn't look up any of the stuff, like look up the NVIDIA keynote. The CEO of NVIDIA was at CES and they gave a keynote to the attendees. Some of the stuff that's being discussed is just downright scary and is some of the stuff that Masamune Shirow was talking about back when he published Ghost in the Shell. Okay, so next author's note, page 98. In looking at a book on brain death, it appears that whether a ghost attaches itself to a body or not is determined partly by the activities of the cerebrum and the lower part of the thalamus. Generally speaking, what we refer to as the spirit or soul is a very vague concept, including things programmed into or closely related to the physical body, such as memory, the results of chemical reactions, and emotions, etc. So it looks like you can't see this, it's too small. I drew a question mark back when I was 16 when I got this 25, I can't do math, what's 98, 27 years ago. But I get exactly what he's saying, right? So the thalamus, if you look into it, like he said, controls things like memories and stuff like that. But it's just interesting because what actually happens when somebody flatlines, right? When somebody dies, like in that exact moment, like what does that medical term refer to? And it is those parts of the brain that they're usually looking at, right, where there ceases to be brain activity, where they will then say, okay, the person officially has experienced brain death, and then it goes from there in terms of they going to try to keep resuscitating them, etc. And then he talks about the spirit or the soul, right? So that's something that's talked about again and again. Whether you want to say spirit, whether you want to say soul, whether you want to say consciousness, right? As I had mentioned, Serial Experiments Lain covers a lot of some of the same concepts that, obviously that are covered in Ghost in the Shell. Where's the line, I guess, between, a human being's, let's say, right? Personality, their consciousness, their soul, their memories, and like how do all of those different aspects intertwine. And I just find that to be very, very interesting. And what happens at brain death, obviously, to those things, right? So there's no really definitive way to say that that scientifically. You can't prove that, right? You can't record what happens because once you're gone, you're gone. You're not here anymore. So, and then he talked about just the physical side of it, the chemical reactions that result in the flatlining, right? And the brain waves not existing anymore. Okay, so next author's note, page 100. I'm sure there's really no need to note this, but the amount of micro machines in the solution, the amount of current applied, and the length of time, etc., are all allowing for some error determined by the class of micro machines. There are different types of micro machines, those that react to pressure, changes in temperature, pain, which is difficult, and they are mixed into the solution at a fixed rate. Changing the ratio of micro machines makes it possible to make a particular sense more delicate. Furthermore, for cyborgs employed in special types of labor, it's also possible to create special skin senses, such as the ability to detect gases or magnetism that humans do not possess. So that was more just like technical in terms of like what's the difference between like humans and Ghost in the Shell versus robots versus androids, right? So it's kind of more author's notes that Masamune included. So this is more about the micro machines. Let's see, Kusanagi. Just looking at the next notes. Yeah, this is more like technical stuff about the micro machines. I'm going to skip over some of this. It's not like more the philosophical stuff that I'm interested in. This one's kind of interesting. So page 108, what do total cyborgs eat? So it's a mix between, humans that are mostly cyborg, maybe just an arm and a leg, et cetera, to like everything up to like a total cyborg, right? So Masamune Shirow says in his author's note, I imagine that initially cyborgs consumed small quantities of a paste-like substance or pills, but partly for psychological reasons, by the time of this story, they are shown eating synthetic foods such as shown above, with a normal appearance and oral sensation, including taste. Fujikomas, on the other hand, can last for 2 months by merely replenishing their tanks with a fluid mixed specifically for neurochips. Or let's assume so. Fujikomas aren't pure biorobots, however. Okay, so the next note... Oh, talk about virtual reality, so I'm definitely going to read this one. So page 108. This is not an e-brain space. Capital E dash brain space. I thought that was so interesting. This is how long ago this was published in 1998. Or virtual reality, but a 3D video room. So think about today with like augmented reality, VR headsets, Pokemon Go, right? Holograms. Like look at how much technology changed in the almost 30 years since Ghost in the Shell manga was published. Colonel Tanada. So again, she's a cop, her partner Bateau, and then their superior is Colonel Tanada, is on a platform like a huge room runner, the orientation of which is adjustable. He's surrounded by a dome-shaped room with scenery simulated using a retinal projection on the white screen-like walls. Others would not see the view he does. golf simulators using a similar but much cruder principle exist today. That's how long ago this was written. Like, I want you to understand, it was written, this was published so long ago. So I was in high school when this was published in 1998. That for Masamune Shirow to get across what he was trying to, like, represent in the manga with the 3D stuff, he had to take it to a golf simulator. And then, like I said, compare that to, like, the 3D stuff that Meta has today, the augmented reality stuff that exists today. Compare that to everything that exists, like the glasses and the holograms. So it's just incredible just to even see that, right? Like some of the terms that like don't even exist anymore, like e-brain, right? So obviously that was a term that Masamune Shirow had created in the story, but it's like just even that tells you, like, just in a short amount of time too, like, it's less than 30 years, right? It's well within my lifetime because I'm only 43. So I was 16 when this came out. So it's not like that much time has gone by. Like, has a lot of time gone by? Yes, but it's not like 100 years. So I find it interesting because it's like, it's so much technology that has happened in that much time. I feel like it's too much technology that's happened in that time. I feel like it's over the top and I feel like it's going too far. And there's no like bulwark against this constant push for endless and mindless technofuturism. It's like all technofuturism is good. It's like, no, it's not, right? A lot of it is actually very like dystopian and reckless and potentially harmful to humanity. So I found that to be a very interesting note. Okay, next author's note, page 135. This is a quote. Masamune Shirow put this in quotation marks. One life is more precious than all the stars in the heavens. Wait, I'm going to scroll up. I can't see. Like, I don't know why it's not. Okay. One life is more precious than all the stars in the heavens. Or so the saying goes. But it's just a noble sentiment. In reality, a planet is worth far more than even a race of beings, including human. And thinking otherwise is a manifestation of the arrogant attitude we humans have that makes us ignore other life forms. I hate the saying. I do have respect for human life, but I'm just trying to say that it's not as important as a whole star. So I'm actually an anti-natalist, so I 1000% agree with Masamune Shirow. There's not much more that I can say than that. So let me look at the next note here. So this is more about, let's see, God. Okay, so this is more about, like, again, he talks a lot about ghost, spirit, ghost in the shell, ghost in the machine, consciousness. So this talks about that. Page 118. The activity of cells creates order, forming organisms, human bodies, and groups of individuals. Just as at each level, every one of these things has its own phase, if that's the right word. The phrase about the world turning refers to the overall speed of people's activities. This doesn't necessarily imply there is a larger overriding conscious world. Although they are of completely different scale, I use the words God, lower G, and spirit in a similar way. Channelers are said to speak with the will of the gods, but I don't think this means a human-like God speaks to the channelers. I think a special phase that we call lower G, God, merely syncs with the channeler's linguistic field, physical functions, etc. So it's kind of like how some people believe, what I do, like there is like a universal source of energy and human consciousness and karma and oneness and knowledge. And I don't want to get too deep with it, but I agree with them, because if you tap into that, you can tap into like everything and anything you want to tap into and access that. So, all right, what's the next note? Page 119. In the future, perhaps such advanced, high-precision robots, almost all androids, would not really be discarded so easily. But only a few years ago, so 1998 when he wrote this, who would have believed that the office and audio/video equipment we now take for granted would become so common? Frankly, I doubt that true humanoid robots will become so popular. if they were mass marketed, it would probably be with a leasing system, and there would be monthly inspections. Don't forget, though, that nowadays, when machinery has been used for 5 or 6 years, it's scrapped or sold cheaply to other countries. The same thing's true for consumer goods with AI functions built into them. So this is really interesting because we can already see what Elon Musk is doing. We can look at CES conference from this year in January in Las Vegas and see what other companies are doing. We can look at what NVIDIA is doing. And you're not always going to predict things right when you're 30 years out, which is basically, where Masamune Shirow was. But, they're not leasing them, right? They're pitching these androids that would be live-in helpers, like I talked about before. They clean your house, they'll cook dinner for you, they'll do your laundry, they'll do your dry cleaning, they'll pick up your kids for you, et cetera, to live with you, though, right? So they're going after people, obviously, that are wealthy, that have a lot of disposable income, right? They're going after early adopters that want to try technology as soon as it's available, that wouldn't feel uncomfortable, obviously, living with an android. A lot of people would say, no, thank you, right? Or it's like, I'll pick up my own kids, right? Like, I'm good. I wouldn't say he was wrong. I would say that, it's not possible to always predict the future correctly 30 years out. He was prescient about the things that he was, saw correctly. I think I agree with him that I would think that, people would rent before just outright purchasing and spending so much money on something like that. What if you don't like the job that the robot does, right? People are so particular about the way that they clean their houses, or like, what if the robot picks up your kid and the kid is upset and the robot just ignores it the whole way home, right? So just giving a few examples. So I get why he would think like, okay, they'd be expensive, why would you just off Jump Street just automatically say to yourself, I'm going to buy it? But, we can see that he was wrong about that. But I think the idea of it was sound, even if it's not what ended up happening. Okay, so the next note, page 121. Okay, this is pretty specific. I'm not really going to read all of that. It's more about like genetic engineering and fungus. So I'm going to skip that one. Okay, so this is about realism. Again, he's talking more about Japanese politics, and he said he purposely like changed things in the manga, made it more like the British parliamentary system in some ways than like the Japanese system and the police system. So I'm going to skip that stuff too. Let's see. This is about, again, the weaponry. She's a police officer, so I'm not really interested in that. I'm going to skip that. Let's see. He's talking, this is more about like different police procedurals and like why he wrote things a certain way with Kusanagi and her police partner. Let's see. Here he's talking about exposition. Okay, here he's talking about criminal sentences, weaponry. This is more about politics, weaponry, police, weaponry. I'm more interested in the philosophical stuff. Let's get back to that. Let's keep going. Weaponry. Okay, here, wait. A total cyborg. No, okay, that's very, very technical. Traffic accidents. Okay, assassinations. That's more political. Okay, I circled this one. Oh my gosh, I added it to my AIM profile. That is what that says. Do you guys remember what AOL Instant Messenger was? If you're as old as me. I want to see what this says. So page 242. The quote-unquote soul that Bateau, so Kusanagi's police partner, is referring to here represents a fairly simple collection of energy, a relatively low-level spiritual structure, what I would have referred to as a low harmonic level in Orion. So Orion is a manga that Masamune Shirow did prior to Ghost in the Shell, as opposed to a true ghost, which is the higher level spirit attached to human bodies. Manitou and other spirits exist on an even more elevated plane and resemble what we call lowercase g gods in the generic sense. The spirit world is infinite in its range, but from our perspective, it includes everything from just below humans, from residual memories to simple insect and animal spirits, to way above humans, macrocosmic spirits at the limits of human imagination. Like human inner space, the spirit world is not vertically ordered in a hierarchy of control. Instead, the upper level is the sum of the activities of multiple sections. The same principles also applies, I suspect, to politics and ecosystems. Of course, if you select specific individual levels to examine independently, then the entire structure appears to have a master-slave, top-down control aspect to it. But one suspects that the act of selection itself is what yields the materialistic conclusions to which people often come to. If concentrated thought creates matter, molecules, chemical compounds, cells, organisms, and systems, then there is also a mode at each level of the hierarchy capable of bundling it all together. So that's very interesting. I do believe that thought created our entire existence. It's something that my brother wrote about a lot. Everything comes from thought. So there's not much more I can say than that. I don't know what I put in my AIM profile 27 years ago. It's not like it still exists for me to go back and look, but it's very interesting author's note. Let's see what else. So this is more talking about cyberbrain, cyberspace, audiovisual representations. Okay. Let's see, a ghost in this case refers to the state of the status body system, and not to a bundle of energy in the object called the brain, although it may be a place created by energy in our story, so ghost in the shell. The self that the puppeteer refers to is an integration of information that has reached a specific level of complexity, shifted, and created a phase called life. That's interesting if you think about it. Because what really is like individual human consciousness? Like, that's as deep as what I was saying before about like the robot and how would you actually know if it knew Japanese, or is it just like spitting out what the kanji represents but with no actual understanding of what the kanji is? Because you can't read the robot's mind, you wouldn't know, right? Like that's a thought exercise that a professor came up with pertaining to AI, right? But in terms of like consciousness, there's a similar, like, it's not like you can read a human being's mind, right? So there is obviously like very, very subjective aspects to like what reality is and isn't. You look into the Mandela effect, I'll leave it there. But I find that very interesting because the definition of what an individual human consciousness is, how you would even go about proving that, and how not objective it is, I find interesting. And I think it's very, very connected to what Masamune Shirow was talking about in Ghost in the Shell. Because he had the different levels, like I said, of like ghost, spirit, soul, all the way up to, like he said, like a life, Manitou. He had all these different categories. So I find that interesting. Okay, so this is more the next note, author's note about physics. He does mention the self being a phase of the system. Let's see. Thought of by the physical self to a level where it's being influenced or controlled by a guardian deity. Wow, that's interesting. A protectorate spirit or an original spirit, etc. So, according to some physics, this is page 271 as author notes, depending on the situation, even the spirit that we think of as the self, right? So when we say like myself, like my personality, my consciousness, like who I am as a person, like me, my energy, right? Like what makes me unique. Okay. So a phase of the system, perhaps, so that's Masamune Shirow's note, may actually change mode from thought or physical self to a level where it is being influenced or controlled by a guardian deity, a protectorate spirit, or an original spirit, etc. That's pretty deep. Look at those different categories, right? Somebody controlling you, a deity. Somebody, protecting you, a deity. It's like an angel or a god or something like that. Or an original spirit, which can mean almost anything. That's what I was saying before. Like, even the self is pretty subjective, right? Because if I say myself is one thing, hold on, guys. Sorry. TikTok is making me confirm something. That are the same shape. Wait, what's going on? I don't understand why it's not. Ugh.
L W E H B L W E H B L W E H B.
Sorry. For some reason, TikTok thought that I was inactive. It's like, I'm reading philosophical stuff from Masamune Shirow. I'm not inactive. Oh, let's start again. According to some physics, page 271, author's note, Masamune Shirow, Ghost in the Shell. I'm sure everybody laughed. That's okay. Depending on the situation, even the spirit that we think of as the self. So the self, like what makes you you, your personality, your consciousness, your energy, who you are as a person, like what somebody would miss about you, what when you're gone, why somebody loves you, why your best friend is your best friend, why your partner is your partner, right? Like your distinctive qualities and your traits, literally what makes you who you are as a person, right? So what we think of as the self, a phase of the system perhaps, this is Masamune Shirow's notes on Ghost in the Shell, may actually change mode from thought or physical self to a level where it is being influenced or controlled by a guardian deity, a protectorate spirit, or an original spirit, etc. That's pretty deep. Think about that. Wait, let's stop for a second. So a guardian deity, so like a god, right? A protectorate spirit, that could be like a guardian angel. It could be like a deceased family member or loved one. It could be an ancestor, or an original spirit, which really opens things up because, as I was alluding to before, the self is very subjective, right? So when you really start to kind of get deep into it, it's like there's a lot there. It's like, could you have lived previous lives? I'll give that as an example. If you're somebody that practices Buddhism or if you've looked into it, right? So which self is it? Is it one self that is maintained through countless lifetimes, or through every reincarnation? Is there different selves being attached to a soul? Is there no definitive soul? Like, you can keep unwrapping and unraveling it. So I found that very interesting because that's obviously what Masamune Shirow was getting into in this author's note. If we're talking about, going back to this note, if we're talking about infinite free Hollands in both lower and upper levels, then inner space and outer space continues ad infinitum. Shinto also considers things in terms of 3 stages: the Iku Musuku, or conscious self, the Taru Musuki, or unconscious self, and the Tamazu Mamusubi, or the self that transcends the self. So nirvana, but if the self transcended the self, what happened to that initial self? And then when the self transcended the self, after you transcend it, is that a new self? So were there three selves then? The initial self, the self that transcended the initial self, then the self after the transcending happened. So that's pretty deep when you think about it. That's a lot of selves, right? But we say myself and we say yourself. And what he's challenging is that notion. It's a very Western notion, right? So in America, there's the Judeo-Christian Western, the European Enlightenment model of things. But the notion is there's one self. And he's challenging that. Okay. Next note is about the vascular system. It's pretty physical, just talking about, sort of the inner workings of the cyborgs in this manga, so I'm going to skip that. Let's see. The note after that is talking about Batou, so Kusanagi's partner. They're both police officers. I'm going to skip that. Electronic, magnetic force. Gonna skip that one. Puppeteer. So the puppeteer goes to the shell. Y'all have read this. If you've seen the anime, if you've seen the TV series, you've seen the movie, there have been so many iterations over the years. So page 277, author's note. The puppeteer has discovered that at each tier, the relationship between quanta creates a phase. This is also a discovery of self. The self as part of the whole used to consist of a relationship such as the complex structure of natural things. Then there's an arrow that points both ways in his author's notes, a part of nature. But now phases such as society, corporations, and the state are also powerful. Most religions have anthropomorphized the upper level of the system they believe in, and thus think of it as a sort of lord over the decision-making process. But like the relationship between the mind and the body, this is not really a higher level of control. It should be thought of as a phase mode of the totality. Next, author's note, page 281. What do you think are the top 3 events in history? In the context of the story, Ghost in the Shell, Major Kusanagi, so the main character, is thinking of the discovery of fire, electronics, or electricity, and the creation of life. I realize these are kind of vague. I know that some people would probably list the wheel, computers, nuclear energy, or writing, language, or death, which is a big one. All are important. In my way of thinking, the fire differentiated man from apes, and electronics includes information processing by computers. I can understand why some people would leave out physical tools, but not including language and writing systems and symbols, and especially death. Well, so that ends that note. This next one, he talks about the religious references in his manga, so Ghost in the Shell, but also Orion, which he published before Ghost in the Shell. So, the facts on page 283. The fact that I have a lot of religious references in my comics recently, Orion is another example, has nothing to do with the popularity of new religions in Japan. I include the reference because I think that as society ages and enters an era where high-tech and philosophical problems are increasingly intertwined, issues regarding brain death and the environment, organized religion is one of our biggest obstacles. At the start of the 21st century, around the time a savior is prophesied to return, I believe the fusion of science and religion is going to be one of the most critical issues facing us. Religion will have a huge role in issues of abortion, blood transfusions, bio-meat for consumption, the use of fetuses and the dead for bioparts. He was so prescient. Like, there's nothing more I can say. Next author's note, page 284. Kusanagi, so main character, Kusanagi's skull is made with a titanium shell, and she has a large number of prosthetic enhancements. So she really does have to worry about sinking, but not all cyborgs sink. Some models are designed to float with special foam-based materials. So that's just kind of more on the, design side of like how he thought of some of the mechanical aspects of some of the characters. This is about a submarine, about explosives. Again, it's about police officers, so some of the notes are actually really not about philosophical stuff. Okay, page 313. Japan used to have a jury system, but it was suspended, not abolished, in 1943. November 1st, 1990 is the 100th anniversary of Japan's modern judicial system. In recent years, there has been a movement to reconsider the use of jury trials and other forms of citizen participation in the legal system. So again, this is more because she's a cop, so obviously there's going to be some political stuff and legal stuff in the story. This is about Kusanagi and Bato's car. I have a note on the next page. I don't know if you can see this. It says atrophy entropy. So let's see what that's about. Okay, vehicles that Kusanagi and Bato were driving, bomb casings, aluminum compounds. Okay, I asterisked this next author's note, so I'm going to read it. So page 337. I've read somewhere, so obviously Masamune Shirow, author's notes. Page 337. I've read somewhere that in the very distant future, after 10 to the 107 seconds has elapsed. That's a lot of zeros. 10 to the 107 seconds have elapsed. That's a distant future. The material universe will become an extremely rarefied. And when I say rarefied here, I mean really rarefied. So I'm reading this word for word. Gas of electrons, positrons, and photons, and will stabilize. With this kind of universe, it's hard not to start imagining such implausible things as the eternalities of God or spiritual trips unhindered by the speed of light. And it's like, yeah, because everything started with the Big Bang. It expands. It's going to then collapse back to that single point. Then it's going to expand again. It's it's an external loop. It's an infinity loop. And it encompasses everything from interstellar travel, interdimensional travel, parallel universes, multiple dimensions and realities, and time travel and wormholes and traveling beyond the speed of light and everything else, right? It encompasses everything. So, next note, page 304. I'm sure everyone is aware of the theory of the void-like nature of the galaxy, but the idea of a rotating universe is probably a product of my own vivid imagination. My reference to moment may be a completely inappropriate and silly analogy, but who knows what time is really like anyway. In the second panel, in terms of a signal, I think that complete homogeneity would represent death. Trite randomness is something machines are actually better at than humans, so a biased randomness in and of itself may be a characteristic of life. Okay, page 341. For an interesting definition of life, I recommend von Neumann's ideas as described in an information theory definition of life in chapter 11 of the book by William Foundstone titled The Recursive Universe, Cosmic Complexity and the Limits of Scientific Knowledge. Contemporary Books, Inc. It has descriptions of everything from dead bodies to clones. But what the heck? I wouldn't know how to classify an old man with dementia who's finished his genetic replication. That's a very interesting question. Is that person technically dead because his cells are no longer regenerating and his brain technically has experienced brain death? Or should he still be considered alive, but to somebody that has advanced dementia? It's not as clear-cut as people want it to be and make it seem. Unless somebody can define holons, it seems to me that organ transplants will make this problem spiritually impossible to resolve. Right, because what is death, right? It gets into the esoteric and not just the medical, right? But if self-replication can be considered a life form, then intelligence should be too. The real problem is that life is such an unscientific word, of course. What's the definition of life? What's the meaning of life? What's the definition of death? They act like they're medical terms, but it's not black and white at all. Okay, that was just about the puppeteer. that is all of the author's notes for Ghost in the Shell. So it was very interesting, very philosophical. He's very prescient. He foresaw a lot, and it was very interesting. I first read this when it came out when I was in high school in 1998. And rereading it. I've read it a few times over the years, but reading it now at 43. It's very interesting. So I'm going to end the live. Thank you for everybody that came to it. I have more things I'm going to read, so I'll see you at my next live.